Hey Lexi, what do you say we share our thoughts on a pair of movies, one from my childhood, one from this year, that both owe a big debt to a certain Ring-related book trilogy?
Sounds good.
Then let's get the conversation started. Hello and welcome to LexiCon. It is Maddie along with
Lexi.
And Dylan.
And now, before we get into the show proper, I want to say something. Hopefully down the road when someone is listening to this, it won't be relevant anymore. But, as of the time that we are recording and when the show goes up, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, regardless of whatever government protocols may be ending. But COVID-19 is still as dangerous as ever. So, please, get vaccinated, get boosted, socially distance when you can, be wary of large crowds, practice good hygiene, and wear a fucking mask. I mean, let's try to keep us all safe long enough for AI to kill us. Anyway, now that my soapbox is out of here, on with the show. 35 years ago, on May 20th, 1988, George Lucas's fantasy film Willow was released in theaters. The story of a diminutive protagonist on a world-saving quest bears obvious resemblances to J.R.R. Tolkien's masterpiece, The Lord of the Rings, and not just because the latter is essentially the template for all fantasy fiction that followed it. More recently, Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves was also released in theaters and has made its way to home viewing now. As we've said before, D&D is itself very much based on Tolkien's creations, so it felt appropriate to discuss these two movies on the same show. Let's go chronologically if y'all don't mind, and start with Willow.
Alright.
Now, the two of you just saw this for the first time the other day. Well, I actually saw it at the theater in 1988, and then probably a dozen times or more on home video, though, to be fair, until we watched it together. I hadn't seen it in probably 30 years. And until we watched it again the other day, I'd forgotten how good this movie was. I mean, to be fair, it was a touchstone film from my youth.
Yeah.
Like I said, I went to see it in the theaters, and being a product of George Lucas and Ron Howard, my parents were both fully on board because they were fans of both those individuals, you know, from American Graffiti and Star Wars with Lucas, and of course Ron Howard being Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show, and Richie Cunningham on Happy Days.
Nice.
And my mom just being into the fantasy milieu in general. This was pretty much guaranteed to be something we were going to check out. And like I said, we did go see it in the theaters, and we got it when it came on home video. And I watched it a lot, probably both by myself and with my friends. But you know how it goes. Things you're into when you're young just sort of fall by the wayside as you grow up and get into other things. And I mean, I was thinking about it, even like Star Wars, I kind of left behind for a time.
How do you leave Star Wars behind?
Well, it's not that I didn't like it anymore, but I was just on to different stuff and into different things. And it really wasn't until the prequels were announced that it sort of came back into the forefront of everyone's consciousness, you know. And say what you want about the prequels.
I was saying, no, I don't know. Baby.
No, I'm saying, say what you want about the prequels. They did sort of bring Star Wars back for everybody's sake, because it had been so long. And it was still around, and people still loved it, but there wasn't anything new or anything to really get people excited about it again. And then, you know, the prequels came out, and the new toys, and then we got the cartoon series, and eventually Disney would buy Lucasfilm and do what they did with it, both for good and for bad. But it all kind of goes back to, you know, the announcement and subsequent release of the prequels, bringing it back to the public's consciousness again. And Willow just never had anything like that.
Yeah.
Until, of course, recently with the series.
True.
And speaking of the series, we should point out that we just watched the first episode right before we recorded this.
Yeah.
So we don't have a lot of thoughts about it yet.
Not yet.
Once we get through the whole series, we may share them, we may not, depending on how strongly we feel about it. But all we've seen is episode 1 so far. And I mean, as far as the series goes, I don't have many thoughts on it yet.
Me neither.
I do like the fact that Mad Mardigan Sorsh's son is named after Eric, one of the characters from the original movie who fell during the battle. I thought that was cool. I'm not crazy about the fact that it seems like another one of those setups where it's like, yep, everything we did in the first story was kind of for naught, and now we're kind of, you know, back at square one. I mean, I expect there to be new conflicts when you progress a series, but I'd just like to see the characters have some success and happiness and growing, and then eventually face new and different conflicts instead of feeling like, oh, we're right back to the same fight. But again, we've seen one episode, so I'll reserve judgment as far as that goes until we get along further into it.
Reasonable.
I did think it was cool that I believe her name is Joanne Whaley, who played Saoirse, that she's back in the series. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was neat that the character had her signature sword, which a lot of the characters in the original movie had signature weapons, and it was cool to see that. And I'm glad that Carly from Captain Falcon and Winter Soldier is in the series, because she's an actress I really like, and I've enjoyed her in everything we've seen.
Yeah.
So it looks like it's going to be a fun series, certain minor qualms aside.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, all we've got to go on with just a single episode.
We'll have more later.
So back to the original movie, you know, the source material for this series. Obviously, like we said, clearly inspired by Lord of the Rings.
Very much.
And again, Lord of the Rings inspired a lot of things, Star Wars included. So it's not really surprising. I think there's Star Wars influences in Willow too, which again is
What
not surprising.
inspired Lord of the Rings?
Huh?
What inspired Lord of the Rings?
That's a good question. Dylan and I have seen the movie Tolkien, and I don't really remember a lot other than his experiences with his friends. But I mean, some of that was mirrored. A lot of people have said like his experiences during the war are sort of mirrored in Lord of the Rings. All other people have discounted that. So I'm not sure, but that's what I say. I mean, I know some forms of fantasy existed before the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
I mean, even The Hobbit, of course, predates the Lord of the Rings by 20 years probably. But it does seem fairly original, and certainly an inspiration for just about everything to come. Like we said, D&D and movies and books and everything seems of any sort of fantasy genre.
Yeah.
Seems to have its roots in Lord of the Rings. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings and Dune. And then to a lesser degree Star Wars, but Star Wars was inspired by Lord of the Rings and Dune.
Yeah.
And like Hidden Fortress and Flash Gordon and the seminal book Hero of a Thousand Faces, which sort of charts the similarities in stories and fictional storytelling and maybe even non-fictional storytelling throughout the years. But most of it does seem to go back to Lord of the Rings. That seems like a very... And I mean, again, you could look back to even like religious tales and fables and whatnot would have inspired modern storytelling, but you watch Willow, if you're familiar at all with Lord of the Rings, you see it's very similar.
Very much.
To be fair, when I saw Willow, I had never read the Lord of the Rings books, and the movies didn't even exist back then, of course. There were animated versions of them, which I had seen, but they're very much scaled down compared to even the late 90s, early 2000s theatrical movies. Maybe it's just 2000. I can't remember when Fellowship came out. I think it was like 2000. I think it was like 2001, 2003, and 2005. So early 2000s. But anyway, those didn't exist back then. And like I say, I hadn't personally read the books. I was fans of the cartoons. In fact, I'd like to show you guys the animated ones at some point.
It was 2001.
Yeah. But not Willow, though. Willow was 1988.
Yes.
So it predates that by a good bit. But, I could go on and on about this. Why don't you guys start sharing some of your thoughts on the movie, having seen it for the very first time? Like I said, I really I liked it a lot when I was a kid. It was one of those movies that was really important to my childhood, but I just kind of forgot about how much I really liked it. So I was pleasantly surprised that it held up so well. But what did you guys think, having seen it for the first time?
I enjoyed
pretty
it.
Good.
We definitely have more thoughts than that.
I'd give it like a 7.8.
You rating it now?
You're jumping to the rating already?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this isn't so much a review as more of a retrospective.
Yeah.
Again,
It's a bit too late for that.
35
review.
years old at this point.
Yeah.
Well, pretty good.
When we get into
Significantly
Honor
older.
Among Thieves, it'll be more of a review. But like I
Yeah.
said, this I just call a retrospective.
It was fun. It was
I feel
fun.
like it felt a lot more lower fantasy than something like Lord of the Rings. Like, it was definitely still fantasy, but, like, lower magic and lower, like... There's one as many, like, fantastical things.
To be fair, there's magic throughout D&D, both the game and the movie we've seen, but it's not exactly the driving force in any of that.
It's
And
like...
I felt like magic was much more the driving force in Willow than it was in something like D&D in general. I mean,
Willow just felt, like, simpler, but also Lord of the Rings has 3 movies to establish a bunch of different things.
But I mean,
Giant
the whole thing was
eagles,
driven by an
dragons.
evil sorceress, and the prophesized child being born to overthrow her. You had 2 other good sorceresses. You had Willow learning to be a sorcerer. I mean, magic really drove this film.
Yeah.
I was gonna say there were no dragons, but there technically was a kind of dragon-like thing.
In Willow?
Yeah, the big old, like, dragon thing.
Oh, the thing the troll turned into?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fucking weird.
Yeah, no
80s, baby. Do what?
Yeah, Willow does not have a lot of explanations for things.
Well, like I
You
said,
didn't need them.
to be fair, too, I mean, you only have so much time to tell the story. You've complained, too, about there's not a lot of character building and a lot of backstory for the characters, but I mean, you only have so much time to do it, and it's clearly a plot-driven movie more so than a character-driven movie.
Yeah.
And to be fair, a story like this probably did deserve, like, the 3-movie treatment that the original Star Wars trilogy had, or that the Lord of the Rings had, but it just wasn't to be, or even a spin-off series, which we're getting now, but it's the story,
Getting
20
back
years
and
later.
canceled.
What?
Didn't that get canceled too?
I've heard conflicting reports.
I've heard it's been...
Disney never came out and said it was canceled. There were reports on other sites that said it was canceled. But then I think one of the creators behind it said, no, it's just on hiatus. Or people have back. Nobody's actually come out. Nobody who has anything to do with the series has actually come out and said that it's canceled.
Greenlit.
There are no current plans for a second season, but there's nothing saying there won't be a second season. Something like that.
Okay.
But also, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars also had like 1 billion extra books and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the Star Wars Extended Universe means a lot to me as a Star Wars fan, but I didn't even get into that until long after the prequels. I know some of it existed, like the 90s is when that stuff really started coming out.
Yeah.
But I didn't really get into it until then. But again, even the movies had more time for world building since there was 3 of them.
Yeah. You gotta see a bunch of stuff in those.
But I think they did a fine job communicating the story and communicating who the characters were and what their motivations were. I think that all comes through. I don't think any of it's, left to the imagination so much so that you're questioning what's going on.
Yeah.
I think you could argue that the romance between Saoirse and Madmartigan's a little rushed.
Yeah.
But I think if you
look,
I think if you look at it through the lens of, too, she's somebody who comes from a background where she really didn't get much love as a child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Her mom made her kill a cat.
She's clearly starved for attention, and then she meets Madmartigan just as an adversary at first, but then of course he gets the spell put on him by the brownies, and he starts professing his love, and that clearly had an effect on her. And even when he was like, no, that's not me, clearly there was still something there for him, and to have had that sort of love expressed to you and have somebody who actually seems to care about you, that's got to be a powerful attraction to somebody. So I can buy it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's not like she needed a man, she just needed someone.
Yeah.
And I think it also comes down to her realizing that she was on the wrong side, and he was just the representation of, oh, that's the right side, that's where I need to be. Yeah. So, and I mean, as a kid, I didn't think about any of that. I just accepted it for what it was. But even going back and watching it now, I'm sure some people would go back and question that, like, that doesn't make much sense.
It didn't feel too off to me.
But I don't think it's. I think if you really. It's not something you even need to think about. It's not the kind of movie where you need to think. As long as you can grasp what's going on, you don't need to think that much like, well, wait, why this? You just have a good time. And I think that follows along with it. But I think even if you do, there's a perfectly logical explanation that holds up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Apparently, the movie does have a lot of backstory and stuff. Only in an additional, like, tabletop RPG source book.
But again, that's not really surprising. Think of all the Star Wars lore that was built, not only through the books, but even before that, through the fan magazines, and the comic books, and the action figures. A lot of what came out of Star Wars was from all the supplementary material, not the movies proper.
Yeah.
So, I mean, being another George Lucas property, that's not really surprising.
Is that Willow only got, like, 1 book, and that's it.
Yeah, only 1 movie, too. I don't necessarily...
1 book, 1 movie, that's all you get.
Like I say, for as good as I think the movie is, I don't think it was a particular hit. I don't know that it was considered a failure either, but obviously if it had been a massive hit, anything close to Star Wars, there would have been more Willow, probably.
And it was good enough for them to make a series of it.
Yeah, but
decent enough for Disney.
In the modern era, especially with the stratification of entertainment, and there being not only so many channels, but so many streaming services and independent houses for production, it seems like more and more stuff is being mined for entertainment, so it's not really a surprise. But I mean, if nothing else, it was a cult classic. It had its fan base for sure.
Plus Disney's got all that money. They're just going through the backlogs. Like, what do we own again? Oh yeah, let's look with that.
Oh, we own Lord of the Rings Light, Lord of the Rings Zero Sugar.
You know, it's funny though. It's clearly as Willow is influenced by the Lord of the Rings, the books. I feel like the modern Lord of the Rings movies, as far as the way they look and the way they did certain scenes and the tone, is influenced by this movie. Yeah. Because if you look at this, it looks like Lord of the Rings movies, but it looks like the things that weren't explicitly spelled out on the page of the Lord of the Rings books. Some of the choices that the filmmakers made, you know, based on their interpretation of the books or what they felt like needed to be added. But I mean, you look at like the fight at the end between Rizal and Bavmortia, there's literally a scene where one of them is spinning the other one around. And that's like exactly what they do with Saruman and Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. And that's not described anywhere in the books.
But it is in Lego Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Everything's in Lego Harry Potter.
Lego Harry Potter was inspired by the Lord of the Rings movies, inspired by Willow. Inspired by Lord of the Rings.
I mean, clearly Harry Potter is nothing that was, whether the author explicitly states it or not, was clearly inspired by Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Yeah. I say just about anything in the modern fantasy genre, and I say modern fantasy from 60s on up, were influenced by Lord of the Rings. And anything that Lord of the Rings influenced would go on to influence other things, and it's just a cycle, that's how it goes. But it is funny going back and watching and saying, wow, this is so clearly influenced by Lord of the Rings, and not something I would have picked up on as a kid.
Yeah. Especially with the freaking halfling dude having to go on a magical quest to take something to some location to save the world.
Someone in this case, not something.
Oh, yeah.
True.
And I think it's funny, too, when the nursemaid smuggles Allura out of the castle, and then, the evil soldiers catch up with her, and she sends her down the river in a basket. It's like, Moses much? So, I mean, again, you see storytelling even back to the earliest stages of documented human history still influencing us nowadays.
Yeah.
So, other thoughts on the movie?
I truly did not have enough thoughts on this movie.
This is a movie that don't think.
It's like, I watched it, I enjoyed it, it happened, that's that.
Obviously, the best character in the movie was Matt Mardigan.
Of course. That's what I first saw Val Kilmer, and I know he was Iceman in Top Gun, but I never saw Top Gun. Like, it was there in the background of my life, but I never really saw it.
I've also never
It's like, yeah, Top Gun, but I never actually got around to watching it.
So I technically saw Top Gun Maverick, but I didn't.
This was my first introduction.
Wait, what?
Damn,
You did too! We all saw Maverick.
I don't remember this.
I remember they did the Death Star one, and that's all I remember.
And you know what? It was really good. I liked it a lot. It was a really good movie.
But they stripped the Death Star one, that movie.
But,
You and I apparently zoned out doing all of it.
still, yeah, I never saw the original. But yeah, so this was the first thing, Willow was the first thing I ever saw of Val Kilmer, and I always loved him as Mad Mardigan. He was...
Matt Mardigan is like a combination between Aragorn and
Han Solo.
Legolas. And Han Solo.
I mean, he's clearly the Han Solo of this movie. That's one of the obvious influences of Star Wars on this movie. When you've got a farmer who has to help save a princess and hooks up with a rogue. I mean, and Val Kilmer's doing his best Han Solo in this. Not to say it's a rip-off of performance. He clearly makes it his own, but he's clearly inspired by Harrison Ford as Han Solo.
But he's also Legolas from the Lord of the Rings movies because he does all the action scenes and stuff. He does all like the sword fighting, most of the sword fighting and stuff in the movie.
You kicked our microphone.
And I kicked the microphone.
You kicked the table on which the microphone
No, I
rests.
kicked a water ball that hit the table where the microphone rests.
Fucking Rube Goldberg machine of microphone hits. Kick the water bottle into the table onto the microphone, and that's why you heard that.
Yeah, Legolas gets like all the action scenes in Lord of the Rings.
He doesn't get all of them.
He gets all the cool ones.
Aragorn gets plenty of cool action.
Yeah, but Legolas gets all the cool ones. He goes shield surfing, and takes out an elephant.
Yeah, and a lot of that stuff is just contrived for the movie. Like, Legolas he's there in the books.
Legolas is just there to do badass
As far as explicit descriptions of what he does, they're very much lacking in the books. A lot of that stuff is just been, and that's what I'm getting back to too, saying they were clearly influenced by their own mind, but I think clearly Peter Jackson and Philippa Boyens must have been fans of Willow, because I can see that influence clearly carrying over.
Very possible.
But in the section,
fun cycle.
In the section where Mad Mardigan sets like all the traps and stuff, and takes out like half the.
Yeah, he set up those traps fast too.
Yeah, and also he had like 15 crossbows.
Yeah, I knew you'd either really appreciate that or you'd say, that's just ridiculous. You couldn't fire crossbows like that. I knew you'd like the crossbow part, but the application of the crossbows, I wasn't sure how you'd feel about.
Yeah, it's fine. Oh, okay.
The two little characters. They
brownies.
They just made me think of the guys in Night at the Museum.
Yeah, I really like those guys.
Yeah.
Dylan wanted to say they were the Jar Jar of this movie. I'm like, no fucking way. They're the R2-3PO of this movie. There's no way they're the Jar Jar. At worst, they're the Merry and Pippin in this movie. And by that I mean the movie version of Merry and Pippin, because the book version of Merry and Pippin is way better than the movie version.
I think they're a bit more comedic relief than R2 and C-3PO.
R2 and C-3PO are comedic relief from the Star Wars movies.
Well, yeah, but R2 and 3PO, they're very important.
But they're not.
They're like the most important characters.
And I appreciate their loyalty, the way they're like, we'll never catch up with the horse. Well, we better start going, and they cut the barrel in the scene to help them get rid of the one guard that's hanging on in the wagon. I mean, they're bros, they're in it. And I was shocked to find out that Kevin Pollak is one of those actors. You guys, you're like, who? I know, but he's an actor and comedian who's in a ton of stuff from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. He was Boss Vic Koss in That Thing You Do. When they did the initial show, I'm sure y'all are drawing a blank, but he's somebody I've seen in a lot of stuff, and I was like, oh my god, Kevin Pollak is in this. And on one level, it's like, well, of course you wouldn't recognize him. He's doing a silly accent, and he's all dressed up, and he's going to take his hat off, and he's bald, and But at the same time, watching the opening credits, I'm like, Kevin Pollak's in this? I didn't remember that. And as soon as those characters come on, I'm like, fuck, that's Kevin Pollak.
Nice.
So I thought that was really neat. Of course, Mad Mardigan. Of course, I was gonna say Mad Mardigan's great, but also, of course, Warwick Davis as Willow,
Yes.
the titular character, is awesome.
Of course.
And you know, I like Sorshin. I like the character Eric, who we mentioned earlier, who dies during one of the battles at the hands of General Kale. I do like it at first. You know, when you meet Eric right after we met Mad Mardigan, and Mad Mardigan's in the crow's cage, which for some reason for me, it's evocative of like Jesus on the cross to me. I know it's not exactly the same thing, but it's sort of like you know, he's up on I don't know. It sort of felt Christ-like to me watching it over. But and of course at that point Eric just abandons him, like, you know, fuck off, Mad Mardigan. I still have my loyalty. You've given up yours. And then later on he meets him in the village, and at first he's like, you know, you can't win this fight. And then when Mad Mardigan captures Sorshin, they get out. Then Eric and the bros come out and help foment their escape.
Yeah.
I mean, that's cool. And then, of course, Eric falls at the hands of General Kale. And General Kale is played by Pat Roach, who's a former professional wrestler, mainly in Britain, but he's in he did a lot of acting. He's in Raiders of the Lost Ark, too. Mm-hmm. Not number
Never
2,
seen
but TOO.
I'm with Gobble on that.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, so there's a Lucas connection there is all I was getting at. Just like, I mean, Ron Howard, he was in George Lucas's first big movie, American Graffiti. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he would go on to direct Willow. He also directed Solo, although he wasn't the original director for that movie, and for whatever you think about that, but
Alright.
just all part of the Lucas legacy. I also like the fact that all the characters had like distinct weapons. Mm-hmm. Like not so much Mad Mardigan because he had to get a weapon back, but he still had a distinct looking sword, more of a traditional looking, you know, broadsword. But Sorsha had like the curved blade with the ridges on the back, and General Kale had the wider blade that had the ridges up both sides, and Eric had the blade that had like the hand guard on it. And all those were replicated.
Wait, didn't Mad Mardigan have the blade with the hand guard?
He took it after Eric died.
Ah.
It was Eric's sword, and then once Eric was killed, Mad Mardigan took it to chase after General Kale.
Ah.
I didn't pay close enough attention.
Yeah, that was
to
Eric's sword from the beginning. And the action figures actually had those weapons. I remember them very distinctly. Although it's not fair to call them action figures because they didn't fucking move. They were basically just really detailed statues.
You think you could use them for D&D?
Well, they're too big.
They're like this.
They're smaller than like the 3.5-inch G.I. Joe figures, but they're definitely bigger than D&D minis. They're probably like 2.5
So if you just play
inches tall.
D&D in a different scale.
You can use them at really big D&D.
I still have it in the boxes of the various boxes of my toys that we still have around the house. I still have at least one of those Willow figures. I think it might be Eric. I've seen it. When we were cleaning out the basement. Either in those box of toys or in the box of toys that are on the other side that we haven't sorted through yet. I've seen it in recent years. It could even be.
You didn't take it out, gosh.
When we clean up our
I know, and I'm sitting here like, great, we've made plans for the weekend now.
I was like, the last time we did it, the series was barely even out.
Yeah.
If that, we weren't really, you know, in a Willow state of mind.
Yeah.
But they were neat looking figures, but I always have a complaint if action figures don't move. And that's always a bit of a drawback.
I'm still mad at the Star Wars dolls that were pre-posed and could only move in certain ways.
I think there's still action figures. Can still be fun if they don't move, though.
No.
They can. I mean, the original WCW action figures that I spoke about on the last episode that came out in like late 90, early 91, they looked great, and they were size appropriate. The taller guys were taller, the shorter guys were shorter. And they were in poses, and you could do certain things with them, but you couldn't do as much with them. That's why, like, the G.I. Joe figures from my youth were always the best figures for wrestling, because they had, you know, opposable joints, they'd been at the knees, they'd been at the elbows, the arms, the shoulders rotated, you could do all kinds of moves with them.
Yeah, so the funny thing is...
And even for, like, G.I. Joe purposes, you could hold weapons in different ways, you could do different moves and move them, you know, throughout the terrain, so... I always prefer that for my action figures, but you can have fun with statuesque action figures.
Yeah, I was going to say, the funny thing is, I remember when I was younger, I did not like the dolls that had a lot of articulation for whatever reason, but now I can't stand the dolls that lack articulation.
For your baby brain.
Probably, but now I need articulation. If I can't get a made-to-move Barbie, I probably don't want it.
But I remember we had a bunch of, like, small figures. They're like little scuba guys.
Yeah, those guys are neat.
Yeah,
it's not just scuba guys. There's like just regular looking GIs in like the camouflage gear, and there's like the more futuristic ones in the white suits. Those looked really neat, and like I said, they came with different weapons and different poses. So they did give you some variety. I liked those figures a lot when I was a kid, but again, I weren't
liked them a lot.
They weren't as good as the figures that could move. It could hold different weapons. It could be put in different poses, and you could just play more with.
But they're definitely much easier to play. If you just pull them out, you
could have fun with them, and like even like the Star Wars, the proper Star Wars figures weren't as good as the G.I. Joe figures in that they didn't have as much movement. Like the legs would move forward and back. The arms would move forward and back, but they didn't bend at the elbows and knees. Yeah. So they weren't as posable as the G.I. Joe figures that would come right after them. But they were neat still. And then there was what we always referred to as micro, which were the little metal Star Wars figures in small play sets. And
those are nice.
You could definitely play with them, like ching ching ching, like that's not the lightsabers, and I'd be like, but you know what I'm saying. What my dad and I would do is we would take turns like setting up a whole scene with all the guys all around play sets, and they're like, all right, come on, check out my scene, and we explain the scene we set up. But you could definitely still play with them, and even that in and of itself was really fun. So you could definitely have fun with figures you can't pose, but it still puts them a notch below.
Figures of that.
I would take probably less distinct looking figures that can move a lot over more distinct figures that can't move. But it's nice when you can get both.
I was going to say, I would take a combination, please.
Yeah, that's the best.
The better combination of that.
But if I had to choose one or the other, give me the ones that can move and at least look pretty much like what I expect them to look like.
Now, the little metal guys, you could definitely use those as D&D minis.
Yeah, probably.
True, but are we doing a Star Wars campaign?
Then why not? There's rules for laser guns and D&D.
And speaking of D&D, should we transition there into the more modern version of Lord of the Rings?
Sure.
Dungeons & Dragons, Honor Among Thieves. It's Among Thieves, right?
Yes.
Feels like it should be Amongst Thieves, but I don't think it is.
I don't think so.
No, this movie isn't fancy enough for Amongst.
It just came out earlier this year, right?
Yes. Not that long ago.
In theaters, and it's...
Beginning of April, didn't it?
Something like that.
It's now been made available for home viewing, and we viewed it at home just the other day because we still don't want to go to theaters because too many people spreading germs there.
D&D popcorn bucket.
Yeah, there's the new trend to release things, and then near the end of its theater one, release it at home for like $25.
Yeah, I just wish they'd release it in conjunction with this theatrical run. I mean, I think at this point, people who want to go to the theaters are still going to go to the theaters. It's still a different experience. So
I guess so. It's not. So as soon as the movie doesn't come out, people don't buy it, and then invite 20 other friends.
They're trying not to kill theaters as slowly as they can.
So people who
But we had this discussion before. Theaters are always their trajectory is going to be whatever it's going to be.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think they're going to completely die because it is a different experience going to see something. I prefer to go see a movie in a theater.
Yeah.
I mean, it's different. Depends on the movie theater. Depends on, but I mean, it's just a unique experience, and I don't think it will ever completely die.
Probably
because it is unique. But they're not the same as they were 20 years ago, and certainly not the same as they were 40 years ago. So they're going to evolve, and their trajectory is going to be what it's going to be. And I don't think giving people more options is really going to affect that much. At the end of the day, you're just affecting the consumer. I don't, you're not going to affect the houses all that much. Because people, still, if they don't want to go to the theaters, they can't afford it, they're not going to go. And I mean, there's too many options out there for entertainment at this point to where people aren't going to be like, well, I got to see this movie now. Some people are going to feel that way, I get it, but by and large, people are like, if it doesn't work for me to see in the theater, then I'm just going to wait. And I can go watch YouTube. I can go watch Netflix.
True.
I can just watch my home movies. I can watch any one of 500 cable channels. I can watch any one of 24 streaming services. There's just too many options for entertainment out there at this point that I don't think there's any way to change what's going to become of theaters. At the same time, like I say, I don't think they're going to go away completely, but they do need to evolve. Yeah. And I think part of that is going to be allowing for more options for at-home viewing. I mean, we had this wonderful experience during the pandemic, for as ironic as that sounds, in that we saw there were different ways to do things. Mm-hmm. And it feels like people are just too willing to, we just have to go back to the old way. There's no way, when we really should take a look at these things and try to figure out how to adopt them and adapt them into our modern world in other ways. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame how people just want to go back instead of trying to go forward, because there's ways to do things better and still make the things that we care about work. Yeah. But I digress, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, I noticed with another movie that came out sometime last month, I think, and possibly as well as D&D, because this movie was also made available for like $25 on Prime.
Ant-Man and Quantumania was saying it's available.
Yeah.
As of like 2 weeks ago, it was available.
But I saw, at least with this one movie, one of the options for viewing at home was something in partnership with AMC.
Well, I've suggested that too.
It was like an AMC at-home thing.
If you're going to have the at-home options, you could theoretically siphon some of that money toward the theaters to keep them up if that's important. And I mean, I hated the thought of, they're tracking what people do, but don't tell me you can't have some way to, follow the data and find out in which states and even which cities this thing is being viewed and purchased. I mean, there's a trail there.
Yeah.
I don't want to suggest that people would be infringing upon people's personal information, but I think you can still help out, even if you can only do it, at the countrywide level or just the international level, whatever the business is, set up for. I still think there's a way to do it. We've talked about this at length before in other episodes.
Yes.
But besides the fact that I don't think that it really is going to directly affect the course for movie theaters going forward, I think there's a way to help alter that in so much as you can still funnel some of the money toward them.
Yeah.
If so you choose. But
back to D&D.
Yes.
The movie or the game?
Both.
I was gonna say, well, that's been D&D Honor Among Thieves. Not a single fucking word about the actual movie.
It is a really good movie.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I very much liked it.
I worried early on. I worried going into it, having seen the trailers, that it was going to be too irreverent and ironic and just too cool for school. And I was sure we were going to get like some modern rock songs in the middle of it, sort of like, because the trailers look like Thor Ragnarok. I think the scene of the paladin making the leaping strike into the dragon was straight out of fucking Thor Ragnarok. And I'm like, I don't know. Wait, that's not a bad approach. And for Thor, it works fine because Thor's in a modern setting. For as fantastical as Asgard is, it's a modern world, so that makes sense. And I mean, I guess you could argue D&D could be a modern world in the Forgotten Realms, but it still feels more medieval.
Very much.
And we didn't get any of that, which was good. And really, early on in the movie, I'm like, yeah, we're getting a little too much of this. It's a little too irreverent. But as it went on, it didn't really feel too much like that. You got little jabs here and there from some of the characters, but most of that was really limited to Chris Pine's character, and that was just sort of his role.
Uh-huh.
And so they really didn't overplay it. I still would have preferred a much more earnest telling of a story set in those lands. But I didn't think this was bad. I thought they walked the line really well. Mm-hmm. But it still felt to me too much like just a fantasy film with D&D references scattered in, as opposed to just being a straight up D&D film. Because I think there's two ways to do that. I think you do it really meta, where you make a whole lot of jokes about the game, and it's almost a parody of people playing their campaign out.
Yeah.
Or you do it really straightforward and really earnest. And this was somewhere in the middle. And I thought it was deftly done, to the point that I didn't think it ruined the movie at all, but it just didn't feel too much like a D&D. It's just like, oh, that's a D&D reference. But it's not really a D&D movie. But again, I'm not a huge D&D fan. I mean, I play D&D with y'all mainly because Dylan really wants to, and I appreciate D&D. I've always thought it's a cool idea, but I've never been fully immersed in it, so I may not be the right person to be making this judgment. But just for me, it just felt like a movie that happened to have D&D references in it more so than an actual D&D movie.
I feel like it was very much. It very much felt like it was in the D&D world. Partially because of all the D&D references. For the most part, honestly.
You can go on about that in a moment. Finish this thought.
One thing that I think made it felt more D&D, at least for me, is if we saw the different D&D species or whatever, like more of them.
Yeah, but I think the only thing I'll say about that is if you try to get too many different species in and too many different characters, you're going to start to water down the story and not have so much time to focus on the actual story. And then it's like, that's cool, but if you want to tell a really cohesive, in-depth story, you need to somewhat limit your cast.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to do like 3 movies.
It's in the background even, I wish. We saw more.
Because I feel like there was a fair amount scattered throughout. Let's be fair.
For the most part, though, we just saw humans are very much human-likes. We saw like a dragonborn, an Okokwa, I think a half-orc at the beginning.
We saw the world's worst halfling.
Yeah. 2 of them.
I thought it was the same dude.
Was it the same dude?
I think so.
I thought so.
I don't know.
Yeah. But I mean, go watch Lord of the Rings and look at the hobbits in that, or even the Hobbit. That's what a halfling should look like.
Even all the other species, the dragonborns, the Okokwas, they all look good.
They were just
CGI down.
They were just CGI down. It was really, really jarring.
Oh my gosh! Was Will Davis off that week? But anyway, and we saw, like, 2 tabaxi, I think.
I was gonna say the cat.
And that's, like, all the other species we saw.
I want to say that I liked
And then in the main cast, there's a tiefling that just looked like a human. And
she had horns!
But very small ones.
But they weren't that small. B, aren't tieflings humanoid?
Yes, but his complaint is also something else.
That she could look like that?
His complaint is also, she lacks a tail.
She had a tail. It's a very small one.
Okay, she lacks in the book tail.
It wasn't that, it was thin. It was long, though.
I don't know, I didn't see the tail.
At first I thought she had just affected the tail because she is somewhat of a shapeshifter.
I don't know, I'd have to go back and...
No, but then the more I watched, the more I saw, she just has the tail.
Yeah. And also her horns were very tiny.
They were not tiny! Tiny horns would be like little stumps coming out of your head. I mean, they weren't like that. She had the back down the head satyr horns. Yes!
The horns don't look that big.
He did not pay much attention to
her. The horns don't look that big.
Yeah, they went back the length of her skull plus some.
Did they?
Yes!
He also said that
How many times
they could have and maybe should have chosen a different skin color for her. Just because they could.
Most people who play a tiefling do not
go human colors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the only argument I'll make for that is production-wise. I don't know.
Okay, they weren't that big. They're medium.
I don't know how easy that would have been to pull. You could definitely do it. We've seen it.
Yeah, definitely. But with
everything
what
else
they were
have to do,
doing
with the budget, the time,
and everything,
the actor, I don't know how feasible that would have been. It literally could have just been a practical choice.
I was going to say one cool thing that Dylan told me about
that
they apparently spent their time and budget on was flying a DM out and actually having the cast play a campaign as their characters prior to filming.
That's interesting.
Wasn't the campaign actually the movie or whatever?
I don't know.
I thought that's one of the things you said I heard. Was that the campaign was actually...
I don't think I told you about it. I thought you told me about it.
I thought you told me about it.
I'm pretty sure you told me
about it. Okay,
it doesn't matter.
One of us heard about it and told the other one about it.
I'm 9% sure
you told me? No, I told you. No, you told me. No, she told me. No, I told them. No, the frog told me. They were significant.
Frog told you?
They're like...
We have a frog poster on the wall.
They're like this big.
I once played a frog in
They were significant. I mean, she had long hair... So they covered up a little bit. Yeah. If she'd been bald or had a crew cut or something, you would have seen them more. But I thought they were pretty significant holders.
But anyway, we saw a tiefling that looked for the most part.
Her partner.
A tiefling that for the most part looked very human, and a half elf.
She had horns,
which of course looks very human.
Yeah. But what else do you want in there? I mean, if you put an orc in there, it's just Lord of the Rings at that point. People are just going to say it's Lord of the Rings.
True.
I mean, there's also.
I will say,
and we did get plenty. We got plenty of creatures from D&D. We got the Displacer Beast, and we got Owlbear, and we got...
I think the creatures are fine.
Fat Dragon.
We got a dragon, of course, and we didn't get...
And a gelatinous cube.
Well, I was going to say, we got almost like a gold dragon, but it was made out of stone when it was, brought to life by the Red Wizard.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's a spell in D&D. I haven't read all the spells.
No, but it's kind of neat that it's like, we got to get a dragon in here, but let's play with them a little bit. Let's make one really obese and roly-poly, and let's make the other one a construct out of something. Yeah. So we got to have a dragon, but let's not give them a straight-up dragon. I kind of appreciate that approach.
Yeah.
And then you had the one item, of course, the hither-thither staff, which was neat.
Not from D&D.
But it's not from D&D is what I was going to point out.
It's really cool, though.
Just a fucking portal gun, though, let's be honest.
Yeah, it is straight up a portal gun.
So it's like, now we're having other video game references in this. And D&D is not even a video game proper. There are D&D video games, but of course, originally it's a tabletop game.
It's like, I feel like there's probably a staff they couldn't use a staff for, like, the whole plot they had. Mm-hmm. During the bridge scene, I thought they could use maybe a different staff. From D&D. I didn't actually know if there was staff.
Why couldn't they have used it for the entire thing?
Well... For later on, they use the portal to break into the vault. Mm-hmm. And as far as I'm aware, there's no D&D staff that places portals on them.
There is now!
Just for getting across the bridge, there's probably
I do feel like that they could...
or something.
I do feel like as far as all the spells and the different things in the world of D&D, they could have integrated it more. Every time they did something from D&D, it was like, look at this, it's a D&D reference. It didn't feel super organic. That's what I'm talking about. It just felt like a movie with D&D references. And you've also pointed out, they did a few things that don't really happen in the world of D&D. Like, they actually had to change some of the tenets of the tiefling to make it work in the movie. And some of the Red Wizard shouldn't have been able to do that many spells.
Yeah, the Red Wizard, near the end, they used Time Stop. And I'm pretty sure they're, like, calling down meteors and stuff. I'm pretty sure that's the 9th level spell, Meteor Swarm. Mm-hmm. At least for player characters... you only get 1 9th level spell slot.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean,
as a wizard, you have to take a short rest before you can recover another spell slot. So that's the call down the meters. And they're like, wait, guys, let me just sit here for an hour.
Yeah, I mean, I will say some of that obviously exists for the sake of gameplay mechanics.
Yeah,
it is a little hard to translate that into a sort of real world setting. Like, how did they only have the ability to cast one spell at a time? Yeah, but then
I think that's more to it.
But then you have to take the time to explain that too. So I think personally I could forgive that a little more, although I definitely recognize that's somewhat of a shortcoming. But even you don't think it ruined the movie by any means.
Yes. And also the tiefling, druids can normally wild shape like twice a day, and that's the 20th level druid, then they can wild shape infinitely. But I don't think any of these guys are 20th level. But the tiefling wild shaped 5 times about in a scene.
Yeah.
Which is neat because they also put that on their character sheet in D&D Beyond that they made for the characters.
You also pointed out another thing about how, there's one scene where they're asking someone to heal someone, and that was the one person who couldn't heal them in D&D.
They pretty much
and have
only
2 people who should have had magic, kind of didn't, at least didn't have the magic they could have had.
They pretty much made the sorcerer the magic guy. When druids and bards also have a lot of magic, but they didn't give them any magic other than the wild.
Well, they never said explicitly that he's a bard. They represented by the fact that he played the lute and he would sing.
He does all the bard things other than.
He was also very roguish though.
So bards can be roguish.
He's almost like cross-clashing,
multi-classing.
Yeah.
My only complaint is that we didn't get enough of the paladin.
I thought the interesting thing about the paladin characters, he's like that one player in D&D who really takes his character seriously and stays in character the whole time.
Yeah, or just the NPC that the DM brings in, like, alright guys, you suck at this. Here's this guy, drive the story along.
Been there, done that. Multiple times.
I love the scene when he was walking away.
Yeah, the one where they just didn't stop.
Yeah, that was at least supposedly improvised.
Yeah.
He was really good. Everybody was really good in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, Chris Pine is great, and Michelle Rodriguez is great, so they were, expectedly great. I can't think of the name. Sophia Ellis, whoever played the Tiefling, she also played Beverly in the modern version of It. I thought it was really cool to see her show up, and Simon was great, and the Paladin was great.
I was going to say, the guy who played the Paladin, he plays Simon on Bridgerton.
He plays Simon.
Yeah.
Ironic.
Yeah, he plays on Bridgerton. So
I was blown away that Hugh Grant was in this movie. Like, I didn't see that in any of the previews or anything, and I didn't go search out a bunch of information about the movie, but when he first showed up early on in Chris Pine's backstory, I'm like, that's fucking Hugh Grant. And I didn't like that he was the villain, because Hugh Grant's just too damn likable to be a villain. I'm sorry, he's just too fucking charming.
I mean...
I don't like...
Okay,
to be fair... he's the villain in Paddington 2, and that's part of what takes me out of trying to watch that movie, because he's just too goddamn charming. But it was neat to see him, and he's great, but... I don't want Hugh Grant to be the villain.
To be fair, kind of the point of his character is that he's charming.
True.
I'm just saying the actor himself, Hugh Grant, is to the point, especially growing up during his career, is like he's just a real charming motherfucker. It's hard to buy him as the villain. He was fine in the role. I'm not saying he played it poorly, and by the end, I thought it came around and he kind of grew on me in that role. But just personally, if I'm gonna watch Hugh Grant or something, I kind of want him to be one of the good guys.
Nice. I really liked the
I don't even know why. I'm not even like a huge Hugh Grant fan, but...
The bird character.
Oh, cool.
Jonathan?
Yeah. Whatever his name was.
I think it was John, wasn't it?
Something. It was similar to Jonathan. Maybe like slightly changed, but very similar.
That was a fun little bit where... It was neat because they bookended it with Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez escaping by grabbing hold of the...
Oh, cool.
Jonathan, whatever, throwing him out the window and having him fly him down, and then Hugh Grant tried the same thing, but by then they'd gotten smart and they'd bricked over the wall.
Yeah, during that scene, I even saw the curtain, and I was like, that's a nice little detail, because he jumped out the window before, and then he tried to jump through the brick wall.
But that honestly, it bugged me too, that like they were pardoned, but they still felt the need to escape. I'm like, why you gotta do that to our characters? Just give them their pardon.
They didn't know they were
It didn't even play that much.
Well, to be fair, they weren't expecting to be pardoned.
That too.
But couldn't they have taken the time to hear that they were pardoned or not before they escaped?
No, they were very nice.
It's not like it would have changed anything.
They had to take their shot while they had
changed, exactly.
I don't know, maybe the Coco...
Because the guy was announcing it at the same time, but I don't know. And it didn't
just walked right back out.
It didn't even play that big a role in the plot, because Hugh Grant wasn't sending them back to prison. He was just going to have them executed. True. He could have done that regardless. He didn't need some false pretense to do it, so... I don't know. I'm nitpicking.
It was nice.
By the time the movie was over, I hadn't forgotten about it, but it was washed away and wasn't affecting my enjoyment of the movie.
Yeah, the prison there was like, I think in Icewind Dale or something. Mm-hmm. A bunch of locations were mentioned. Of course, most of the movie took place in Neverwinter, I think. Mm-hmm. And they also mentioned Baldur's Gate.
I have a bunch of little nitpicks about the movie, and I don't think it's the best D&D movie they could have made. I think if they'd leaned either, like I say, much more earnest and straightforward, or much more meta, it probably would have been better. I think depending on what you're into or what you want. But I think it's good. And look, this is probably the most I've enjoyed a new movie in a long time. I can't even remember the last movie that I saw for the first time that I've enjoyed as much as this. I mean, you're gonna have to go back a ways, probably.
Nice.
I'd compare my enjoying this movie maybe a little bit more than something like Shang-Chi.
Yeah, no, Shang-Chi was really good. It'd probably be
around that area.
Yeah, I'd say I'd probably enjoy Shang-Chi just about as much as this.
Yeah.
But there's certainly not much more in the last few years that I've enjoyed as much. A lot of things I've seen were like fine, but not as good. And this was like I say, while I don't think it was as good as it could have been, I'm rating it 2 when I say that as a D&D movie strictly. Just as a movie, it was really fucking good. Like I said, I just think it could have been a little bit better D&D movie. Is all. And again, I'm not the best person to be making that call either, because I'm not a huge devotee of D&D. It's just sort of, in my periphery, but it's not my main focus or anything. So I'd be interested to hear what other real hardcore D&D players think about it. But I think it was a great movie. I thought it could have been better as a D&D movie. And not even in the way that, like, I thought The Last Jedi was a fine movie, but I thought it was a horrible Star Wars movie. I don't think this was a horrible D&D movie by any means. I just think it could have been better as a D&D movie.
Also, I think The Last Jedi is mid as a movie as well, because they spend like 30 minutes on a completely pointless side plot.
Yeah, but if you take that out... If you take that out, it's a pretty bad
movie. It takes 30 minutes of the movie.
Remove a third of the movie, and it's pretty good.
And, well, that's only bad insofar as it doesn't have any real ramifications for the rest of the story. Yeah. And, I mean, at least you get Benicio del Toro, which is always a good thing for a movie. He played the safecracker. But that aside, The Rise of the Last Jedi Awakens.
You were going to say Rise of the Guardians?
No, I was not going to say Rise of the Guardians. Episode 10, Rise of the Guardians.
I knew that you were misspeaking, and for some reason I thought that's where you were going.
But I've always said that Last Jedi is a better movie, but Force Awakens is a better Star Wars movie. Mm-hmm. They're both shitty fucking Star Wars movies. But between the two, Force Awakens is better as a Star Wars movie. But Last Jedi is a better movie. And again, I'm not saying Last Jedi is a terrible Star Wars movie. This is not a terrible D&D movie. It just didn't feel so much like a D&D movie to me. I thought they could have done better as a D&D movie, but I don't think they did anything to degrade D&D or denigrate D&D. Mm-hmm. I don't think they did anything that was insulting to D&D, all the things that Last Jedi did. So it's not bad on that level. It's not bad. It could have been better as a D&D movie. And as a regular movie, it couldn't have been that much better. It was really fucking good.
Yeah, I like this as a D&D movie because it's like, it feels like D&D in the fact that it has like its very sillier moments that feel... And
they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything too over the top silly either. Yeah. I was afraid we were, like I said, I thought we were going to really lean into that, and I knew they weren't really going with that meta approach. Like it's just this really wacky version of a D&D campaign. Like sometimes the D&D campaign can be, depending on who's running it and who's playing it. They did have some moments that I thought were that played off that, but in a good way. Like when Simon's like, "You can't just solve everything with magic," or like we say, what the paladin character kind of represented. So they did some of that, but not too much of it.
I was gonna say,
and like I say, the sillier moments for the most part just make sense. Like we've seen with Marvel movies, they're telling serious stories, but they're gonna have levity in them.
Yeah,
so, I mean, you expect that, and it worked really well. It was really well done. Like I don't know how to explain it better. It just felt like it had D&D references more so than it was really a D&D movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say the thing with the paladin and the bird. Let's be honest, that's exactly what we would do as players. We are not going to check our persuasion or roll or anything and wait to see if we got pardon. No, we're grabbing the bird and going.
Yeah, and maybe that's what they were going for with it, too. And again, that's more of a D&D thing than an actual just storytelling device. So, I mean, from a storytelling standpoint, I thought... And even from a storytelling standpoint, I get it. But it's like, to me, it's like, but wait, we're going to pardon you is just a throwaway joke. Mm-hmm. And it just, it sort of hurts the characters. Like, let's give the characters their pardon. They worked for it. They earned it. Let's let them have it. So just as a storyteller, I didn't appreciate that. It just felt like it was all just, it was A, a setup for a throwaway joke, and B, a setup for the bookend at the end, the callback to it.
Yeah.
And it's like, did you really need that? Or, like I say, if you're going to do it, they weren't going to pardon him, and they did need to escape. So that would have set up the callback much better to me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like definitely the silliest moment was when they had like the projection of Bald Dude.
Yeah.
And distracting them. But I started like glitching out.
I like that, and I thought you would too. And there were a couple other moments like that because it's concentration, and that's a big part of D&D spellcasting. You've got to maintain concentration. So here's a real life example of how you would lose concentration. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I thought
that was good, and I thought it was a real good bit of misdirection because I really thought Chris Pine was just going to be the distraction and let the other folks go in. And it's like, oh, it's the protection. That's neat. And like I say, I can't recall what they were off the top of my head, but there were a couple other moments where a character was trying to do a spell and they lost concentration.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. Oh, I guess when he was like kind of levitating.
Yeah, early on when he was doing the pickpocketing.
Yeah, I'm not sure what spell that'd be.
Yeah.
I guess telekinesis.
What did you think about the representation of attunement in this, where he had to attune to the helmet?
I thought it was fine.
Which is a real thing in D&D, but it's sort of specious. Like, what does that really mean?
I mean, typically attunement happens during a long... Well, actually, I think it takes an hour to attune, not necessarily a long rest. Is it a long rest or just an hour?
I have no idea.
I don't know. But he attuned in 2 seconds.
But it took him a long time to get there.
Yeah.
So he had to work on it, so... And again, it's how do you translate that to a movie? And
that helmet is also not a real item, by the way.
Nothing in D&D is real to me. It's all made up.
It's not in any of the books.
I mean, swords and armor and shit are real, but the items are made up.
The character that made like the helmet and the seal and everything, it was like Mordekainen or whatever.
Was he the helmet one? I thought he was just the seal. I thought they were independent of each other.
But he is a real character in D&D. He's like a wizard dude or something. I don't know his lore.
And we should point out too that we made the comment there were multiple times that this looked like it was going to turn into D&D Ocean's 11.
Yeah.
It kind of was, but it kind of wasn't. But I thought that was neat. I liked the heist elements, but it wasn't all about the heist. It was just a part of it. Whereas Ocean's 11, it's all centered around the heist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought the heist stuff was fun, especially as we've talked about doing like an Ocean's 11 style D&D campaign.
Yeah.
I liked when the tiefling tried to get through the portal into the vault place as a worm.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah, they did.
That was a neat, and that was almost some Ocean's 11 worthy misdirection too, where like they had the arcane seal on the one vault, but that wasn't where the stuff was, and then it was underneath, and you find out that Hugh Grant's character is smuggling the stuff out. And I mean, I thought it became pretty obvious pretty early on what the Red Wizard was going to do, that she was going to try to, make a zombie horde out of the denizens of the games.
Funny thing about the Red Wizards, they are a thing in D&D, but as far as I'm aware, they are not in any of the books of 5th edition, other than maybe one in an adventure in that book from a previous edition.
What I thought was really interesting, not so much in the flashback when they showed the Red Wizard that she was aligned with, but when she was talking to sort of his spectral image, it looked just like the picture of Lich in the Monsters Manual. If you go back and look at Lich in the Monsters Manual, it looked like that Red Wizard in his, astral projection. So I thought that was kind of neat, whether it was intentional or not. I feel like it had to be, but maybe it wasn't. Or maybe I was just misseeing, but that's what it looked like to me.
I have no idea. I have not looked at the Lich much.
Well, it's the same image I used for the border on our Final Fantasy randomizer we did, the Curse of the Lich one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that image.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think if you go back and look at the Monster Manual and go back and look at the movie, I think I'd be proven right. But maybe it was just in my eyes. But that's what I saw. I also saw when they were at the center of the maze and they got to the cage and the people were trapped inside. I saw the barbarian helmet and I'm like, those are the characters from the D&D cartoon.
Yeah, you could also see them a bit earlier before the cage in the maze.
And there was another shot too where I recognized like the knight or the fighter or whatever he is, but it was that barbarian helmet that did it for me. I leaned over here, I'm like, am I crazy or were those the characters? You're like, yep. I'm like, yeah, I thought so. I used to watch that cartoon when I was a kid.
I have not watched that cartoon.
Not something that necessarily stuck with me through the years. Like, man, I got to show this to my kids, and I got to keep watching it. But I definitely watched it a few times.
You didn't sit there like, man, I need to show D&D to my kids. Your kids were like, hey, Dad, D&D.
No, Star Wars was the thing that I really knew I needed to show y'all. But like I say, I credit the prequels having come out too, being a big part of that. The funny thing is, 1999, my cousin and her son were staying with us for a little while, and he wanted to watch Star Wars because this was around the time that I was going to say Force Awakens. That's the Phantom Menace was out in theaters, but it hadn't come to home video yet, and of course, so I didn't have it available. But I had the original trilogy on VHS, so we watched Return of the Jedi together. And watching it then, I hadn't watched it in probably, so that's 99. It'd probably been 10 years since I'd really watched Jedi all the way through at that point. And I'm like, this isn't very good. I remember this being a lot better. Man, this is really like a kid's movie. I don't like this.
And then he came back later.
You not like
man, this is really good.
Well, then I watched Phantom Menace, and I went back and watched the original trilogy, and I watched it with you guys, and I got one. Yeah, no, I do. I see what I liked in this, but just for whatever reason, at that moment in time, I couldn't see it.
He's in it to see it after seeing Jar Jar.
It's just what you're into and what your frame of mind is and everything, and I think with Star Wars too, it's hard to take one movie out and just watch it. Like, if you've seen it all and you're very familiar with it, but again, like I said, it'd been a while since I'd watched through all of them, and just watching one of them, you're like, I don't necessarily see the magic, but it's one of those things where they all build on each other. It's like Rogue One might be my favorite Star Wars movie ever, but it means nothing without the original trilogy, at least the first movie. So, I mean, I think you sort of need to see the big picture to appreciate it all. And so if you just take one out of context, which for the most part I was doing at the time...
Yeah, why did you not pick Return of the Jedi?
Because I always remember Return of the Jedi being the most fun, and so I thought it'd be better, because my cousin was like 8.
So Star Wars New Hope, man.
I know, but there's not as much action and excitement in A New Hope. And it's, I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved it when I was 8, and I'm sure most people could, but if you're just going to watch one, it just felt like Jedi would be the more fun one. Mm-hmm. I mean, shit, the moment where Luke does the flip off the skiff and catches the lightsaber that R2 shoots out to him, that's still maybe my favorite moment ever in movies, so of course I was going to start with that.
Totally got spoiled that Vader's Luke's father, though.
I don't even know how much attention he was paying. But yeah.
Anyway, back to the D&D movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what happened to the D&D cartoon crew. Did they just, like, die in there? Or?
I'd assume so.
They ended up in a cage in the middle of Neverwinter Castle.
I'd assume they probably ended up dead.
I like to believe they survived and they're gonna be in the sequel.
Oh God.
I like they did that spell early on where they had to reawaken the dead, but you could only ask them 5 questions and they'd go back to being dead.
Speak with dead, I assume, is the spell.
And they finally got the information they needed, and they walked away from the corpse with 1 question left. And I'm thinking when they walked away from him, like, there better be a post-credit scene with that guy. And I guess it was a mid-credit scene technically, but I would have preferred that somebody had come along and actually asked him a question. I thought that.
Why are you still here?
Yeah, anything like that. I think that would have been, or they could have just been. There could have been grave robbers or something. They're talking amongst themselves, and here's a question like, "Thank you," and he's dead or something. But I mean, just the fact they went back to it, I really appreciate it. If they hadn't, I actually would have left disappointed. But
I like that whole sequence. I thought it was pretty funny.
Yeah.
The funniest part is when the guy was talking and how he gave the helmet to the paladin and he was dying, and it's like the paladin could have just healed him.
I have nothing for that. I don't know.
Once again, they gave all the magic to the sorcerer.
Yeah.
The sorcerer didn't cast a healing spell. Possibly because sorcerers don't learn healing spells.
I was going to say, you pointed out that that's the one thing in D&D that wouldn't have the healing option.
I mean, obviously they
set
that bit up at the beginning, too, because Chris Pine's wife had been killed by a red wizard's blade. Mm-hmm. They couldn't do anything to heal her, and then his friend, Michelle Rodriguez's character, got killed by a red wizard's blade, and so that was the sorcerer thing. I can't do anything, it's a red wizard's blade. And then it becomes obvious, like, oh, they're going to save her.
Yeah.
Instead of bringing back Chris Pine's wife, which the paladin had warned him against, she's at peace now, you shouldn't disturb her and bring her back, don't use the Stone of the Dead from Deathly Hallows. The Resurrection Stone, sorry.
I believe it's the Tablet of Reawakening.
Yes.
Is the tablet in the movie.
Yeah, no,
yes.
The Resurrection Stone was Harry Potter. I know that. I was correcting myself for that.
I assume the tablet's a cast True Resurrection, which is a 9th level spell that can revive anyone.
Nice.
Whenever.
Nice. Could really use that in our campaigns.
It's a 9th level spell. You gotta wait till level 17 to get that.
I'm just saying, we could really use it.
We played up to level 11. If that. I think we played up to 8, actually.
I was gonna say, I don't even think we've... Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've played up to 8.
Because, my recurring character that I bring in to play with y'all sometimes, he's not double digits yet.
And in our current campaign, we will barely make it to level 10.
Nice.
But next campaign, we might make it to level 15.
Nice.
Still not enough for 9th level spells. I just realized there's only one D&D campaign that gets you high enough for 9th level spells, and it's the one that's just a giant dungeon.
I want to do something like that, though, where it's just a full dungeon crawl and you're just finding... I mean, I don't know. I don't necessarily want it to all be a dungeon crawl, but I
think I'll be dead.
think that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, it's like the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. It's like 22 floors of just dungeon.
I want to do a D&D campaign that's more like a Final Fantasy game, where you're finding items and you're finding weapons and you're going to towns and you're buying upgrades and stuff.
Yeah.
I know you'd have to homebrew a bit of that, but I think that'd be really fun.
There's a tabletop
D&D
RPG kind of based on JRPGs. I'm not sure the exact rules for it.
Well, I know, but you always want to play D&D, so I figure we can, bend one to our will.
It'd be simpler to play D&D because it's already hard enough to teach Alex and Casey how to play D&D. It's like, oh, you know everything you know about D&D? Throw it out the window. We got this new tabletop RPG to play.
Yeah, it was great. Going into the movie, you made a joke looking at me like, okay, now you're going to learn how to play D&D. But then you saw all the stuff and it's like, yeah, no, I don't think I learned anything from that.
Oh, another thing about the sorcerer that I was kind of disappointed of. We only saw his wild magic once.
Oh, yeah.
We saw more than once. He brought it back later. He did it early on. He did it early on when he was conning the people and they saw what the con was and they had to get out of there. And then he did it later because he had it on his little belt.
Well, no, that's how he used his magic, wasn't it? That was more like his component pouch or something, I guess.
I don't know, maybe. I'm not. I figured that was his wild magic and his other spells came from something else.
No, wild magic is like accidental magic.
Alright. Then I'm
Magic gone wrong.
Clearly, I don't understand it well enough.
I'm pretty sure one of my
gone wrong,
characters had
SBAM.
wild magic and I don't understand it.
Yeah, wild magic came out iffy in 5th edition because the DM pretty much has to decide when you roll a d20, and then when you roll that d20, there's a chance wild magic will happen.
But again, like I say, they're only going to be able to fit so much into one movie.
True.
Even if they did the 4.5 hour Return of the King special edition version of this, you're still only going to be able to fit so much in without it being so overcluttered that you lose the main thread and you kind of feel lost in it.
Yeah.
To me, and like nothing really has any impact because you're spreading it out so much. So I say if you really want to include that much of the D&D world, you need a series. You don't either a TV series or a series of movies.
If they do another D&D movie ever, I would like to see the guy that has the fish.
Oh, Xanathar?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Xanathar.
he's like a crime boss in Waterdeep or something.
I do feel like it's interesting if you look at this movie and you look at Willow, two movies obviously that sort of share a fantasy thread among them.
Yeah.
They're all part of that the legacy of Lord of the Rings. This movie is, I think, like 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes longer than Willow. They're both just over 2 hours.
I believe it was 9 minutes longer. I think Willow was 2 hours, 6 minutes. This is 2:15.
Okay. Close enough.
I can remember these specific details,
I think
but I
it's
can't
about 10
remember
minutes.
names
Actually,
in
it was 9.
The point is, I think if you look at this movie being Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, they actually did a better job of telling a really big story and giving you backstory on the characters and explaining their motivations and who they are and why they're doing what they're doing and still telling a large, fantastical story than Willow did.
Yeah.
Not that Willow did it poorly by any means. I think they did a really good job. But to your complaints of maybe you could have gotten a little more character building in it and whatnot, and I don't think that's because they just did it better. I think you think about it. This is 35 years later. They had 35 more years of filmmaking to learn from. So of course, more modern movies are going to do certain things better than older movies. Just like those movies did things better than the ones that came before them, because you have to learn from what comes before and you have to build on that.
And this movie also had a bigger cast.
So I think it's really fun watching these movies back to back and just seeing the sort of evolution when they're clearly part of the same lineage, and just watching how telling these stories evolves. Mm-hmm. So I think that's really neat. It's a really fun back to back viewing.
I agree.
We didn't really review Willow because it feels a little weird being 35 years old.
Yeah.
We just kind of, like I say, gave it a retrospective, but it don't seem to want to rate it. So would you like to share some final thoughts and or rating on Willow first and then Dungeons and Dragons?
Willow, like I said, I give it like a 7.8.
Alright.
Alex?
I probably about an 8.
I'd give it a Star War of the Ring out of 10. If you want a number, I'd give it an 8.5.
Alright.
Yeah, it's essentially like A New Hope by itself.
And what about Honor Among Thieves?
Am I going first?
Sure. If you know your answer, go.
You gotta. I'd probably give it like a 9-ish, around that area. High 8.
Yeah,
At least.
somewhere between an 8 and a 9 for me, I think.
I'd give it a 13 out of 10. An Ocean's 13 out of 10. It's not as good as Ocean's 11, the 2000s versions, but it is very good. And while it's not a perfect emulation of its progenitor, it does honor it, and fans should be satisfied. Plus, there was all that heist stuff. If you want a number, I'd also give it an 8.5 out of 10, which would be a slightly higher 8.5 than the 8.5 I gave Willow. But again, only because it's sort of like the evolution of it. I feel like these movies are very, very similar.
This is like an 8.57.
Not only on the source material that sort of begat both of them, but I think they're telling very similar stories. And I just think it's sort of the modern evolution. It's like, Willow is this older version of it. And if you go along, then the actual Lord of the Rings movies are a step along the path, and then you get to D&D Honor Among Thieves, and this is just sort of the evolution of this fantasy storytelling.
Mm-hmm. I think if they do more D&D movies, instead of doing a sequel, they can pretty much do anything. They can have new characters. They can go to even the other D&D worlds, like Eberron.
Yeah, and if you set it, if you still set it in the Forgotten Realms too, you could always have cameos by these characters, and references to them. It'd be sort of an anthology series, more so than just telling a linear story.
Yeah, I'd love to see more D&D movies that maybe delve into the more obscure D&D things.
I was just going to say my ideal D&D movie.
You could do like a whole D&D cinematic universe like they've done with Marvel and they're doing with DC.
Would bring back the Paladin and would have Xanathar and his fish.
Honestly, that would be the way to do D&D if you're going to do it, is make it a whole universe.
Yeah.
And you could do series, I mean, I don't know if this movie was successful enough to beget that, but maybe.
But pretty much all the monsters in this movie were just like your staple D&D monsters. Like, yeah, this is D&D.
Yeah.
But you want that from the first one, too.
Yeah.
If they go too obscure, then people are going to be like, well, even now you could be like, where's the Beholder, where's the Mind Flayer? But still, you got the Owlbear, you got the Gelatinous Cube, you got the Mimic, you got... I didn't know that a Displacer Beast was really that commonplace in D&D. I know I made you guys fight them before.
I know them quite well. They're in the D&D arcade game.
They're in the monster manual because I see them all the fucking time when I'm flipping through it.
They're fairly common.
And I know pretty much everything's in the monster manual, but I just remember the picture of them very distinctly. And of course, like I said, we got versions of dragons, and there's a lot of different dragons in D&D.
Yeah.
No Tarrasque, though.
Oh god, that's gonna be in the second movie. Alright guys, we gotta deal with the Tarrasque this time.
The whole movie is just taking down the Tarrasque. That's it.
It's 1 hour Quoquo casting freaking saving those spells. One love, 1 hour Quoquo.
There's no setup. There's no follow through. It's just taking down the Tarrasque. They win. Credits.
I was gonna say I was shocked that they didn't use a single healing potion during the movie.
And that's how you play D&D.
No.
When's the last time you used a healing potion?
Probably within the last couple times we played.
No.
And see, when I play Final Fantasy, I'm using healing potions constantly.
Well, that's because you can essentially use them free.
I'm pretty sure my character has a couple in the inventory now. Because we.
And if you're doing them in battle, you have to use a turn.
Yeah, but who uses potions in battle? That's like X potions that heal all your health.
Like in the original Final Fantasy, I'm almost never using a potion in battle. I'm using potions outside of battle, and of course,
they're not even heal in battle.
They're not even potions in the original. They're what? Heals?
Yeah.
In the NES version.
And then no higher tiers of them.
But now in later Final Fantasies, I'm going to use... And they go up. You have the low-level ones, then you have higher-level ones, then higher... And they're called different things in different games. Sometimes they're going to be high potions or whatnot. But in later Final Fantasy games, I tend to use my potions in battle a lot more.
But even then, I'm going to cast a cure before I use a potion.
Yeah, especially if you can use a cure that can affect multiple characters at once.
Yeah.
But I still do find myself more likely to use healing potions in later Final Fantasies than... And when I say later ones, look, I went Final Fantasy through Final Fantasy 7, and after that I kind of backed off the series. So if I'm saying later, I'm saying Final Fantasy 4 to 7, basically.
Yeah.
So welcome to our Final Fantasy podcast.
Yeah, I'd love to see more of like the obscure
done that, damn it.
species and more of the obscure monsters. Like maybe you could see like the little drone guys. Matt probably knows what I'm talking about. Like the little one-eyeballed, the number drones.
Oh, the like Modrone and Duodrone and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, those guys were neat.
Yeah, there's like a whole plot with those guys where they like march across the 12 like realms or dimensions every so often. That's a cool thing. And to see things like the lizard folk, the Asimovs.
Right, but again, there's so much in the world of D&D. You're not going to get it all in one movie.
Yeah.
And if you do...
Maybe we could explore, like, the Feywild or more of the Underdog.
If you do, you're just going to bog it down so much that you're going to lose the thread. So, I mean, they had to be somewhat selective. So, I mean, I feel like the representation, as far as D&D items, characters, enemies, etc., was pretty good. Yeah. And still gave them the chance to focus on a story.
Yeah, maybe we could even get D&D movies based off the modules. Like Lost Mine of Phandelver or Waterdeep Dragon Heist.
Yeah. Like,
in fact, that's less likely.
Said,
but
that's what you need if you want to do it proper. Is you need the D&D cinematic universe. And it can extend into streaming series and theatrical movies. That's what we need.
Yes.
Yeah, I would love an Airborne movie. I love Airborne. So cool.
Alright, well, we hope that you enjoyed our retrospective on 1988's Willow and our look at 2023's Dungeons & Dragons Honor Among Thieves. I really do think they're really fun back-to-back watch, and I would highly recommend doing so if you are so inclined. And we hope that you are inclined to come back next time when the conversation will continue. But until then, I am and will continue to be Maddie.
Lexi.
And Dylan.
And this is LexiCon concluded.
Bye!